let's give you some background on the Nephilim, because I think that's a super interesting conversation that can come of this, which is a great video that I found here. And I had some videos and stuff about the Miami Mall, but I don't see the point. Let's just dive into this video on the Nephilim, because you can go find those in your spare time. Feel free. Be my guest. Oh, and while this is pulling up, you should go over to the Substack. All right, go sign up for my newsletter, austinadams.substack.com. I will be including all of this information in there for you. I'm actually getting some help here, and over the next week or two that I'm going to be onboarding to help automate. I'm going to be shooting more episodes for you guys. I've told you, big changes, all of that stuff, automation, getting people to help me out with this, hiring some people. So head over to austinadams.substack.com. The way that you can help me with that is by getting on the newsletter, being a part of the Substack. In the Substack, you can actually become a paid subscriber. I think it's like $7 a month. And so if you want to help out, pitch in, help me with some of the stuff that I'm doing with these people I'm going to be bringing on to help multiply the content, be able to do more podcasts, all of that stuff, go head over Substack, austinadams.com, or not austinadams.com. That's like some random dude's resume. It's unfortunate, because I would totally get it. But austinadams.substack.com. All right, so here's the video that I'm going to put on. I actually really enjoyed this conversation by this guy. It's the Southern Seminary YouTube channel, but this guy specifically is, I have to see what his name is here, but he talks about the Nephilim here, and this is what I want to preempt our conversation with. And here we go.
The next piece is, who are the Nephilim? In verse 4 of Genesis.
Here, let me do this, because I need to actually lower the volume here.
6, it says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God had relations with human women, and they bore children of them. End of sentence. New sentence. They were the heroes who were from the ancient past, men of renown. There's two major sentences there. First one says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. There are two possible interpretations of this expression, they were on the earth in those days and afterward. What does that mean? They were there in those days and afterward. Well, some people think this means that the Nephilim were the children that came from the angels who married the women in Genesis 6, verses 1 to 3, and that the Nephilim were the product of these unnatural unions, and they appeal to texts from the 3rd century BC and 2nd century BC, the so-called Enochic traditions, the traditions about Enoch, where the Nephilim are interpreted as giants. There's another interpretation that's possible. When it says the Nephilim were there in those days and also afterward, it could mean that before the angels had sex with the human women, the Nephilim were there, and they were also there after the angels had sex with women. So it could mean that the Nephilim had nothing to do with the angels marrying the humans. I think that is the correct interpretation for two reasons. First of all, I examined every occurrence of this expression and also afterward. I went.
So what he's doing is he's discussing it's Genesis 6:13, and I'm actually going through this right now. I'll talk to you probably very soon about my new spiritual journey and theology that I'm walking through right now, and trying to learn the histories of the Bibles and its writings and the individuals who wrote them and why they matter and why their stories are believed and why they're even talking about the same God and all that stuff. But I'll dive into that on a different day. But I actually read this the other night before bed, and it barely struck me. But I guess what he's saying is the Nephilim are told to be these ancient giant beings that were potentially the conjoining of God's children, or I'm sorry, yeah, the angels and the women of man, right? But females who brought children into Earth. So that was like basically the Nephilim were the children of angels with women. So essentially like demigods, if you want to go back to like mythology. So think like Hercules, but that's the idea behind the Nephilim, is that it's the conjoining of angels and humanity to create these giant, strong warrior type human-like beings. And what he's saying is that there's potentially two interpretations of that. One being that maybe they were here before
and I
and
examined
after that,
how
or
it
they
was
were
used. And the
in that
second
way. Here you go.
interpretation best fits and suits how this word is used. So when it says they were there in those days and also afterward, it means the Nephilim were there before angels cohabited with humans, and they were there after angels cohabited with humans. There's a second reason why this is the correct interpretation. The last sentence says they were the heroes who were from the ancient past, the men of renown. This sentence does not begin with and. Now that's very, very important. Almost every sentence in the Hebrew Bible begins with and. When a sentence does not begin with and, it does so for two reasons. It could be because it's beginning a new section, or secondly, because it's making a comment on the previous sentence, what we would call a footnote. It's very clear that this sentence is not beginning a new section, but it's acting like a footnote on the previous sentence. So the previous sentence is saying that the Nephilim were there before the angels and the humans cohabited, and they were there after. And it's making a brief comment that they were the ancient heroes. In this case, what Moses is doing is he's demythologizing the Nephilim. You notice, one of the things that we should notice is the text doesn't tell us who the Nephilim were. What does that mean? Why doesn't the text tell us who they were? Because they were well known to the first readers of this text. The first readers of this text knew who the Nephilim were and didn't need that explained to them. And all Moses is saying is, look, whoever you think these heroes are, like Gilgamesh, these ancient heroes, these men of renown, you've read about them in the ancient mythologies. Whoever they were, they're not part of this story. They don't come from the cohabitation of angels and humans.
Interesting.
And I think that's the correct interpretation. But the problem is, this has been a difficult text to interpret. And it has not always been interpreted correctly down through the centuries. And in the 3rd century BC and the 2nd century BC, they came to an incorrect interpretation. They thought that the Nephilim were giants who were produced by angels cohabiting with humans. And this got into the Book of Enoch. And Paul warns his readers against this because he says in his letters to Timothy, don't argue over endless genealogies and foolish myths. This is a direct reference to the Book of Enoch,
and that's
which
Timothy 1:4
has a
and Timothy
long
4:7.
genealogy of all the angels until you finally come down to Satan, and then they blame all the evil in the world on Satan. What they're trying to do is they're trying to blame chaos and death and evil in the world on angelic sin, instead of blaming it on human sin. And the Bible clearly puts the blame on humans. Genesis 3 shows how sin came into the world. How did we live in a world
so there's your beginning entry into what were the Nephilim. And so he says there's two schools of thought when it comes to who were the Nephilim. The Nephilim were either the children of angels cohabiting, having sex with human women, or they were a being that was here prior to that and existed after that they were already here, and maybe that's not the case. And so that was what the purpose of that portion of that was. So, interesting. Now that can preempt the next part of our conversation here, which is that where I did a deep dive into this. So I found all of the references to the Nephilim within all of the ancient texts. So we'll look at the Hebrew Bible, which is the Old Testament, the Book of Numbers, and I'm going to butcher some of the names of this, so bear with me like I do with even congressmen, as you know, is the Book of Numbers, then the apocryphal and pseudepigraphal texts, which is the Book of Enoch and Jubilees, and some other ancient texts that I will get into as well. So when it comes to the Genesis 6, 1 through 4, it says this is the most well-known reference of the Nephilim. Occurring in the narrative leading up to the story of Noah's Ark, the passage describes the Nephilim as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. It suggests that they were mighty men and renowned figures of the ancient world. The exact nature and identity of the Nephilim have been the subject of much debate and interpretation. So there's where he came in and said, here's my interpretation of it. This is why I believe this one's correct. And here's the other interpretation. And here's why I think that's wrong. Okay. Now let's look at what those passages were. Here's the Genesis 6, 1 through 4, which says, when human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children with them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So there's your first reference to them from Genesis. Now, again, I'm sure there's hundreds of debates that you could probably watch on this and different takes on the theology and backgrounds of this, but there's the two most basic fundamental ideas of who the Nephilim were. All right. Then you look at Numbers 13:33, which is the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament. Now, this is the passage in which the Nephilim are mentioned in the context of the Israelite spies sent to Canaan. The spies report back that they saw the Nephilim there, describing them as giants, which made the spies feel like grasshoppers in comparison. This reference has led to much of the association with the Nephilim with giants. So this is where we get the idea, not only were they strong warriors, but also that they were extremely large, is Numbers 13:33, which says, we saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Enoch, come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them, saying that they were these massive, tall beings out there, and we saw them with our own eyes, which is so interesting to me when you look at the Bible. And this is, maybe I guess we're in the theological conversations anyways. To me, is like, it's so crazy that these accounts are in there. Like, who are these people? Who wrote these things? Why do they matter? What gives them merit? What's the difference between a historical account versus a, mythological account versus, is it a analogy? Is it a real, like, this guy was sitting there as a journalist writing, hey, we saw these fucking huge, tall guys and we looked like grasshoppers. Like, how do you interpret this properly? And then, again, there are certain sections that are interpreted one way compared to another. But that's crazy, right? You're walking down through a forest and all of a sudden there are these, us to a grasshopper is like, think of the scale differentiation there. Now, there's been recent accounts of people saying that they've like archaeologically dug up the remains of large, huge, giant humans, which is like, that adds another element to this, which is really interesting. But then we can get into the Book of Enoch. All right, now I'll give you the context of the Book of Enoch, is that this is the ancient Jewish work not included in the canonical Hebrew Bible, which provides a much more detailed account of the Nephilim. It describes them as the offspring of fallen angels, the Watchers, and human women. The Book of Enoch elaborates on the idea that these beings were giants and portrays them as contributing to the corruption and violence on earth. And that seems to be what he was referencing a little bit earlier. So it says the Book of Enoch is extensive and the Nephilim are mentioned in several parts, particularly in the first section known as the Book of the Watchers. Here is the representative passage from chapter 7. It says, it happened after the sons of men had multiplied in those days that daughters were born to them, elegant and beautiful. And when the angels, the sons of heaven, beheld them, they became enamored with them, saying to each of them, come, let us select for ourselves wives from the progeny of men, and let us beget their children. They became pregnant, and they bore great giants whose height was 3,000 ells, E-L-L-S, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. Interesting. All right. So again, it talks about how big they are, these giants, the Nephilim. All right. The next mention of this is the Book of Jubilees. All right. And the Book of Jubilees is an ancient text not included in the canonical Hebrew Bible. The Book of Jubilee also touches on the story of the Nephilim. It largely parallels the narrative found in the Book of Enoch and Genesis, adding its own details to the story. And this says, like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilee provides its own account of the Nephilim at Jubilee 5:1, which is written, "And it came to pass when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the angels of God saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they were beautiful to look upon, and that they took themselves wives of all whom they chose, and they bore unto them sons, and they were giants." So kind of the same recounting story. Right? These texts have been subject to various interpretations over time, reflecting the complex nature of these origins and the cultural context in which they were written. Interesting. Now, it goes on to reference, in some of my background knowledge here, that the references in Genesis, Numbers, the Book of Enoch, and the Book of Jubilee explicitly mention the Nephilim in other ancient texts are relatively scarce. So it's saying outside of those, it's pretty scarce. However, there are a few other sources, while not mentioning the Nephilim directly, that are associated with them due to the descriptions of giants or similar beings. All right, so let's read those. Among them is the Dead Sea Scrolls. Particularly in some fragments, there are references to giants, which some scholars believe might be connected to the Nephilim narrative, especially considering the scrolls' close association with the Book of Enoch. Now, the first one being the Septuagint version of the Bible, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, and it translates the Nephilim as giants in the relevant passages. This has influenced some interpretations and connections made in later Christian and Jewish traditions. So, it seems like these are all basically retellings of the same story a bit. But it says that the Septuagint does not have a distinct passage different from the Masoretic texts or the traditional Hebrew Bible regarding the Nephilim. However, in Genesis 6:4 and Numbers 13:33, the word Nephilim are translated as giants. Okay. So that's like the text prior to the Jewish translation was the Greek translation, I believe. That's what I'm taking from it. Before that was the Dead Sea Scrolls. All right. So the Dead Sea Scrolls is basically, I'm not going to, it doesn't have the outline for me here, but from what I understand, it's the most ancient, most aligned biblical text that we actually have some portion of today. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says, the Book of Giants. This text is found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which elaborates on the narrative of the giants, which is often linked to the Nephilim. As an example of the fragment from this text has ... They knew the secrets of ... and they knew the requests of ... and the giants plead with them ... It says the text is fragmented and incomplete, so it provides only a partial account. Well, it'd be nice if the partial account had the names of the right? They knew the secrets of blank. Is it the secrets of, Bill Gates? Is it the secret of Jesus? Is it the secret of, it would probably be a little helpful here if we could have the fill in the blank of the ... but I'm not sure. It looks like it's fragmented and they didn't actually have it or they couldn't translate it properly. So next one is the Jewish Midrash or the Talmudic texts. And it says that there are various references to giants in these texts, but do not directly mention the Nephilim. For example, in the Babylonian Talmud, the Niddah 61a, there is a discussion about the size of Og, king of Bashan, who is considered a giant, which says, Rav Yehuda says that Rav says the height of Og, king of Bashan, was 300 cubits, which I don't know what that is compared to an ells. I don't know. And then the last one was Christian apocrypha. Apocryphal. Christian apocryphal texts often explains or expand on biblical narratives with additional details and stories. However, specific passages about giants akin to the Nephilim are not explicitly defined in the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. An example of this being from the Gospel of Peter, which describes the resurrection of Jesus and features a giant emerging from the tomb. Whoa. But this is not directly related to the Nephilim narrative. A giant instead of Jesus? Wow, weird. It is important to understand that these texts provide a broader cultural and mythological context rather than direct references to the Nephilim. The interpretations and connections of the Nephilim narrative are often made by scholars and enthusiasts who study these ancient texts and their interconnections. These theories typically involve the Nephilim being depicted as giant or supernatural beings, often who claim that they have were the offspring of the sons of God and daughters of men, as mentioned in biblical texts. So male angels, female humans. Now, there's your ancient biblical backgrounds. Now, here's some of the theories, conspiracy theories, be it historical theories, theological theories surrounding the Nephilim. Okay, one of which is the alien ancestry theory, right? So we're going to take a pivot here, which I find to be an interesting one, which is that this theory suggests that the Nephilim were aliens or were of alien descent, right? Being a different species completely, or an ancient species of the Earth. Proponents of this view often link them to the ancient astronaut theories, suggesting that they were either extraterrestrial visitors themselves or the result of humans breeding with aliens. This is often linked with the interpretation of ancient texts and artifacts that supposedly depict extraterrestrial beings. Right? And that's such an interesting conversation to me, is like the different conversations, like if the angels fell from heaven, is heaven not, it's such a difficult distinction between heavens being of a different realm, being of a different universe, being of the sky above us, falling from the clouds, right? Could very easily be interpreted as extraterrestrial aliens being angels that fell from the clouds onto our earth and bred with our women and created these large giants. And then, like there's such an interesting intersection between today's conversations of aliens, extraterrestrials, UFOs, and ancient biblical texts to me, right? Aliens, deities, mythological creature, like all of these things could be very intertwined and lost in ancient texts or history books, or even scrubbed intentionally because they don't want you to know the true story. Because as we saw before John Locke's the great enlightenment of humanity, where we decided that we no longer needed humans to speak to God, there's a very interesting intersection here between those. So the next one is the fallen angels and the giants. So it says, in this popular theory, the Nephilim are believed to be the offspring of fallen angels and human women, which could very just easily tie into the alien ancestry, right? It's just, what is the difference between the word alien and angel, if not fallen from the heaven organisms, right? This interpretation is based on certain things of religious texts, including the book of Genesis in the Bible and the apocryphal Book of Enoch. The giants were often described as having great strength, size, and sometimes blamed for leading humanity astray. The next one is the advanced pre-flood civilization, another theory. And I was going to get into this in a second or later on in that earlier thought process, but another theory posits that the Nephilim were a part of a highly advanced civilization that existed before the Great Flood, as described in various religious texts. This theory often includes the belief that the Nephilim possessed advanced technology and knowledge which was lost in the deluge. Right? So before Noah took all of these species of the world onto his ark, and the great flood wiped out everything and everyone that wasn't a part of that ark, which it doesn't seem like the Nephilim were on there. So maybe they were just completely wiped out or put into the oceans with their advanced technologies underwater, right? The same drone-like technology that we're seeing now come out of the water and dive into the water way faster than any technology that we have could just very well be owned by this ancient civilization of the Nephilim, right? It's just different sounds from your mouth speaking the same thing, right? When we talk about the difference between aliens and angels, right? Like, how do we not know that these are interconnected philosophical conversations that are just the same thing, right? Spiritual or symbolic interpretation. Some theorists propose that the Nephilim should not be understood literally as physical beings, but rather symbolically or spiritually. In this view, they represent certain spiritual truths or conditions, such as the struggle between good and evil or the consequences of moral decay. And then the hidden influence on humanity. Some conspiracy theories suggest that the Nephilim or their descendants have been invisible forces guiding or influencing human history. This could include secret societies, controlling elite groups, or other hidden powers that trace their lineage back to these beings. Damn. Right? And so this conspiracy theory suggests that the Nephilim, because I asked it, we got into more history on that when I was doing this research, and that's the hidden influence on human history, was a super interesting one to me, which says that the conspiracy theory suggests that the Nephilim or the descendants have been a hidden influence in humanity, is quite elaborate, and blends elements of mythology, history, speculative, and speculation, essentially. It says secret lineage and bloodlines. This aspect of theory poses that the Nephilim or their direct descendants have maintained a secret bloodline throughout the human history. Right? You want to talk about the 6 secret, royal bloodlines. The same reason that the royalty, the shape-shifting reptilians of their crown have so much incest inside of their family is because they're trying to keep their bloodline pure. Keep their what part of your bloodline pure from what? Right? So the idea behind the ancient royal bloodlines is that this is exactly this, and I've talked about this before, and it's a crazy theory, but it makes sense in this context, which is the idea that there was some sort of being here prior that bred with humanity, and through those lineages, they wanted to keep their bloodline pure as possible. So they engaged in incest so that they weren't breeding with outside sources and muddying the power of their bloodline. What else would make sense about that? You look at the history of the royal families, right? And it's not secret lineage bloodlines. Like, we know who these people are, at least most of them. But these bloodlines are intermingled with royal or aristocratic. The proponents of the idea often claim that these bloodlines have intermingled with royal or aristocratic families, preserving their unique heritage and characteristics across generations. Now, the next one says that control and influence on human affairs. This theory suggests that these descendants have played a significant role in shaping historical events and societal structures. This includes the formation of secret societies, influencing political decisions, and guiding the course of civilizations. Theorists sometimes link them to groups like the Freemasons, the Illuminati, or other alleged shadow organizations. Now, I've done deep dives on the Freemasons. Go look up, I think it was my second episode. I did the Freemasons and the founding of society, our society, right? Talking about how the Freemasons essentially built the United States for what it is today. This plays perfectly into some of the beliefs that I have surrounding the founding of the United States, the Freemasons, the influence they had from the Queen, and the establishment of the banking system within London, the military arm of this society, which is the United States of America, and the religious part of this, which, obviously goes back to the Pope. But there's a really interesting theories surrounding that. Now, the next one it goes into is supernatural or superhuman abilities. Some variations of the theory imbue that these descendants with special abilities or knowledge, which they allegedly use to maintain control or influence. These abilities, which they allegedly use to maintain control or influence, might include advanced intelligence, psychic powers, or other paranormal traits that set them apart from ordinary humans. Next portion of this says the theory includes the idea that the Nephilim or their descendants possess ancient knowledge or wisdom, which is kept hidden from the general public. This could include ancient technology, esoteric spiritual insights, or deep understanding of the universe and its workings. Well, when you go into the Freemasons or the Masonic temples, that they have their own libraries that you're not allowed to read the books within. They do have ancient knowledge within these secret societies that is the fundamental basis of these secret societies, is the ancient knowledge that they don't let other people into. That's why, people want to get into them, is to learn these things and understand these occult types of teachings and information and history that's been rewritten and rewritten and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed is, well, you go into, like Oxford University, or you go in to be a part of Skull and Bones, like the Bush family, and you're let into this club where now you know the inner workings. Now you're a part of this power arm, and now you get put into positions of power by the people that were a part of these organizations. Like, I don't know how far this ties into the Nephilim, but apparently it does. Like, I didn't have that background knowledge. And the next one is end times prophecies. In some interpretations, particularly within certain religious circles, the Nephilim are linked to the end time prophecies. According to this view, this return of the emergence of their powers will play a significant role in the apocalyptic events predicted in religious texts, like the Book of Revelations. Interesting. And the last thing that I dove into here was the more recent accounts of these things, which is that there's the giant skeletons which have been found, right? The folklore and legends surrounding these giant beings. Not sure if it didn't get any examples of those, but that was another portion of it. Modern paranormal and conspiracy theories, which talks about the Nephilim often emerge within the context of paranormal, UFOlogy, and conspiracy theory communities. Ooh. And then internet and social media, and then explorations and expeditions. So there's been, people have said that they've dug up these skeletal remains. But anyways, some of the cooler stories that have come out of this, like actual stories from these, was that there was the giant of Kandahar, which says there's a relatively recent story that emerged from the American soldiers in Afghanistan. And according to the tale, a unit encountered a giant in the remote area of Afghanistan in 2002. The giant was described as being over 12 feet tall, red-haired, and extremely hostile. The soldiers reportedly killed the giant in a firefight. What? The story has been widely circulated in conspiracy and paranormal circles, though there is no verifiable evidence. What? I have never heard of that. We need to look at that shit. What? The giant of Kandahar, Afghanistan. Soldiers fought a 12-foot red-headed giant. Wow. Okay, so there's a fun one to look into. The next one is the Cardiff Giant, which is the famous 19th century hoax of the United States. Okay, let's preempt it with that. The 1869, a 10-foot tall purported petrified giant was unearthed in Cardiff, New York. It created a sensation that was exhibited as a genuine prehistoric relic. Eventually, it was revealed to be a carved stone figure, the creation of a New York tobacconist named George Hull. Despite being a hoax, the story remains a fascinating example of American folklore. The next one is the Lovelock Cave Giants. According to Paiute oral history, a tribe of red-haired giants known as the Sidekin were said to live in a Lovelock Cave in Nevada, which would align perfectly with the Kandahar giant that they mentioned. Legends say that these giants were hostile and cannibalistic. Eventually, the Paiutes trapped them in the cave and set it on fire. Some proponents of the Nephilim theory connect these legends to their beliefs. However, archaeological findings in Lovelock Cave do not support the existence of such giants. Yeah, thanks, because they wouldn't be there still. There's the Patagonian giants, which was in Europe, and the alleged giant in Castanau, Casteinau. In the late 19th century, purported enormous human bones were discovered by a French anthropologist with the sentiment of France. These bones were thought to be some that belonged to a human of extraordinary size. While the authenticity are debated, they fueled speculation about the existence of ancient giants. Dun, dun, dun. And there you have it, folks. That is the background on the Nephilim. Today, biblically, historically, conspiracy, I got you. All right, so do some research. Love to hear your thoughts on it. I appreciate you guys from the bottom of my heart. I hope you have a wonderful day. Subscribe, leave a 5-star review, check out the Substack, austinadams.substack.com. I love you, and have a great day.
Adams Archive.